Guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be my May wrap up. Now for the month of May, I feel like I read a lot of highly anticipated reads for me. So many titles that I was just so looking forward to, hoping they would all live up to be my new favorite read. Some of them did, and some of them did not. So without further ado, let's go ahead and chat about the books I completed. The first book I'm going to chat about, I do have an entire reading vlog dedicated to, so if you're curious about some very in-depth thoughts and feelings, be sure to check that video out. I'll have it linked down below, but this is a book I for sure was not alone in reading this month. I know many of us picked it up with incredibly high expectations, and I'm very curious to know what you guys thought as well, and that is A Book of Night by Holly Black. When I heard Holly Black was writing an adult urban fantasy story, I was like, yes, this is going to be lush, this is going to be dark, it's going to be potent, it's going to draw me in, I am going to be transfixed. Unfortunately, that didn't quite happen for me for the most part, and I will go into more detail. I didn't find this book to be bad, but it also did not live up to the very high expectations I had for it. Overall, I just found it to be okay. Meh, which honestly sometimes is a worse fate than being terrible, because at least then you have like incredibly strong feelings about it, but I really just left this book feeling nah, you know what I mean? This follows our main character Charlie, and she lives in a world where it was discovered that shadows can be harnessed for power. Essentially, some individual shadows can be quickened after being fed blood, and from there granting some people a certain type of magical ability. There are different groups of magic shadow users. Essentially, some people can use their shadow kind of as a puppet, others can transform the look of other people's shadows, and then there's like a more shadowy, if you will, and more mysterious third group that it wasn't really revealed too much exactly what they do, but they do walk around in dark clothing and masks, and the whole group of them is just oh so very mysterious. Our main character Charlie used to kind of work in the criminal underground that surrounds this magic, and while she doesn't have magic herself, there's still a lot of money to be made from stealing other people's shadows, from stealing and selling powerful books about magic. She herself was a very respectable and talented thief, but she has decided to leave that life behind, and recently she's just been working as a bartender, trying to keep her head down and help support her sister through college. But at the beginning of the story, a mysterious figure from Charlie's past arrives and kind of drags her back into this mysterious underground world, and that is kind of where the story takes off. Again, this is a book I had incredibly high expectations going in, and there were for sure some elements I did enjoy, but overall I just felt rather underwhelmed by the story. First and foremost, I do feel like I appreciated the concept of this fantasy world. The shadow magic honestly was very cool, and while it was kind of vague and it took a lot of time to sort of explain the different pieces of it, anytime we were given information, I honestly was very drawn in. I like that the overall society was kind of changed with magic being introduced in the world, from celebrities using it to change how they appear in public and all sorts of other things like that. I found that to be a really interesting component of the book. Charlie herself is really talented. I also do feel like Holly Black does a good job making us feel very connected to her as a character. I think this was successfully done a lot with flashbacks to Charlie's childhood, learning about how she grew up, her connection with her mom and her sister, and also ultimately how she got the skills of trade she has as being a thief. I think really helped us feel she was like a wholly realized character. Ultimately, the issues I had with this book is that it just never really developed fully. I felt like the conflict and the mystery and a lot of the explosive plot points were really obvious, and the entire time I was just expecting there to be a bit of a record skip and something larger was going to be introduced to us. Truly, that never really happened, and I would say the only interesting thing, which is always so annoying because I feel like this happens quite often, especially with first books in a series that are just kind of underwhelming. The first book is often used almost like a prequel, if you will, introducing us to the world and the characters, and like the last 5 pages are interesting, and like I'm so tired of that. Like, yes, I will be reading book 2 because the last 5 pages of this book were interesting, but there was so much space and time to take advantage of a lot of the world building Holly Black did, but it was just honestly left on the table. And the last thing I would say, honestly, that I was very surprised about was the writing style. I've read many Holly Black books throughout my reading lifetime, and she has a variety of different series, but more recently I would say she's known for for writing a very lyrical, dramatic, atmospheric, dark style of book. And I feel like that would have fit so well within this story. And I think part of the issue too is the marketing. This was described to be like the Night Circus, which has an incredibly lyrical and atmospheric setting. And honestly, I just feel like this book did not have that at all. It's by no means bad that it didn't have it, but I feel like I was really led to expect it. So when it wasn't there, I was just kind of confused. And I do feel like overall it would have added so much to the book, especially because we're dealing with shadow magic, underground black market, thievery. Like I just felt like there was such an opportunity to up the ante on the vibes, and it just wasn't fully there for me either. Again, I found this book to just be okay. There are elements of it I really liked. I also just thought there was potential for it to be so much more. At the end of the day, I would give this book like a 2.75, 3 stars. I will be checking out book 2 because I do feel like there is potential within this world, and I do like Holly Black, but needless to say, I was a little disappointed after I finished reading this book. The next book I picked up was another very highly anticipated read for me. I really thought it was going to become a new all-time favorite. So many people have told me how much they loved the book, and great news, it has done just that. And the book I'm talking about is Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marillier. I loved everything about this story, from the plot to the characters to the overall experience and atmosphere. I feel like this book nestled itself inside of me and it will never let me go. I can't wait to read more books by Juliette Marillier. If you love like magical forest, cottagecore kind of fantasy vibes, this is the book for you because it has that in spades. Before I jump into the synopsis and my thoughts though, I do want to give a trigger warning for this book for sexual assault and sexual violence. But in this story, we do follow our main character, Sorsha. She is the 7th child and the only daughter of 6 brothers. She is incredibly close with her brothers. She has a more complicated relationship with her father, as her mother did pass away in giving birth to her, and her father has never really been the same since. He's devoted himself to war and kind of expanding the boundaries of their kingdom, and also on this particular war of vengeance. But Sorsha is a bit of a wild child. She explores not only the forest, but she's very curious and she's learned, which is very unusual for the time period and for the fact that she is a girl. She's also really dedicated herself to the arts of healing. At the beginning of the story, her father remarries and her stepmother actually casts a spell on her brothers and her father, and she has to go on a journey to try to save them. I honestly loved everything about this book, from the characters to the writing to the vibe to the emotional stakes I felt while reading this from beginning to end. It was just so unbelievably successful. Structurally speaking, and from a trope point of view, it's definitely following that classic quest story, a young girl embarking on a journey to try to save everyone she loves. But this is an incredibly harrowing quest, one that tests Sorsha, her brothers, her family in ways that we cannot even imagine. The amount of sacrifice that she's willing to put up to try to save them is not just admirable, at times it's painful and hard to read. She herself has to give up everything. She can't even speak, and she's trying to seek out help from her known enemies, try to bring her brothers back. And what I feel like Juliette Marillier does so well is that she spends a lot of time in the beginning of this book really developing the relationship between Sorsha and her brothers. You feel the love, you feel the commitment between all of them, and you know how much they mean to her. So when she's on this journey, you can really understand how and why she's willing to make these sacrifices. Top of just an absolutely engrossing plot, the writing is truly captivating. This is, as you would imagine, primarily set in a forest, as she herself is a daughter of the forest. She has a magicalness about her and a fate that's intertwined with the forest itself, and just the overall atmosphere that Juliette Marillier is able to provide in writing these settings is so engrossing. The setting itself is a combination of the forests of Ireland and the more pastoral landscapes of the UK. It's moving, it's emotional, it's so well done. I feel like if I read this growing up, it would have been like a foundational read. Reading it as an adult, it was a foundational read. But I will say I wish I read this as like a 15-year-old because it would have changed everything. But nonetheless, I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, and I can't wait to continue on with the rest of the series. The next book I picked up, I was not sure at all how I was gonna feel about it. It was an incredibly hyped read. So many people love it, so many people hate it. Based on the synopsis, I felt like there was a chance I was gonna gonna like it, but truly I was not sure, and that is Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. This is a notorious book, mostly on BookTok, but I feel like it's kind of spread its wings across all social media, and this is a dark academia magical competition book, and honestly, I really enjoyed it from beginning to end. But this follows the Alexandrian Society, which is a secret society full of magicians of high renown and power, and every 10 years they invite 6 inductees to compete against each other to join their ranks. In this book, each individual is approached by sort of like a caretaker, and they all accept for their own unique reasons, and from there you kind of follow the competition unfold as they strive to make alliances, but mostly stay self-interested as they're fighting to become a part of this Alexandrian society. But the catch is only 5 can make it and 1 must die. Here's the deal. I love dark academia for a variety of reasons, but I love its pretentiousness. I love its central discussion on things like science and humanity and just the overall like selfishness of the characters. I just kind of really enjoy watching people sort of play within that space. And I feel like Olivia Blake really took that and ran with it and then added a magical competition to it, and it just really sung for me. In this book, it is a multi-POV story. I wouldn't say there is a clear main character at all, and we actually follow the points of view of every single inductee, and I feel like this was an incredibly smart approach. Not only are we unclear about who has the edge in any one scenario and who ultimately is going to make it to the end, because there really is no, again, main character, if you will, but you also get a clear view on their own motivations. Everyone is keeping their cards so close to their chest as it is a competition, and no one really trusts each other even if they have alliances. You see people parse out partial secrets, so as a reader you kind of get this larger idea, but you're also watching these characters navigate a very mysterious and dark and scary situation. On top of that, I just really enjoy a setting of watching specialists continue to like grow in their power. This is a magic school that's not so much about people discovering their power, but instead geniuses getting full reign to kind of test the absolute limits of their power on themselves, on other people, and because each inductee has their own specialty, it adds a lot of spice. It's all very interesting. Like for example, one individual is telekinetic, one is an empath and can control other people's emotions. 2 of them are physicists, so they can control like the physical world. Other people can see through illusions. Another person's kind of like a human battery and can control plants. So like everyone has their own ability, and how they sync up and work with each other speaks to how their abilities like work well with one another. This book is moody and pretentious, and I also really enjoy when the author is able to capture these like incredibly intense conversations of like science or physics and are able to distill it down to where like I feel like I'm following along, even though like conceptually speaking I don't know that much about physics, but I feel like I'm like clued in, like I'm part of this like highly elite intellectual group, even though I'm definitely not. I truly had no idea where this book was going at any point while reading it. It really kept me flipping the pages. I found the ending to be interesting, and also the mystery surrounding even the origins of the Alexandrian Society is super cool too. I'm looking forward to the sequel. If you like dark academia, I do highly recommend checking this out. I liked it quite a bit, and I honestly gave it like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book I completed this month was another one of my most anticipated releases of 2022, and that is Kayi by Vaishnavi Patel. I was really anticipating this book, particularly because it's a feminist reimagining of well-known Indian historical lore, and that alone just sounded like a really interesting concept. I love sort of historical reimaginings. I read She Who Became the Sun and The Song of Achilles. Like all of these stories tend to be some of my favorite, so I did have really high expectations going into this. I also was really interested because Kayi is more of a villain and is known for being like this evil female character, and this story kind of turns that on its head and tells the tale from her point of view and from her experiences, which I think is honestly so cool. But of course, this story follows our main character Kayi, and it opens in her childhood, and she is the only daughter of a kingdom, and she basically has been raised her whole life on the stories stories of the gods and how they grant powerful boons and protect the worthy ones around her. But she's also seen her entire worth be distilled down to what type of political marriage she can bring her family, and also watches her mother be unceremoniously banished from the kingdom. And when she turns to the gods for help, she hears nothing. But in reading some of the books her mother leaves behind, she discovers she herself has a power. She begins to foster that magic, and we see how it's indispensable to her throughout her entire life. She also begins to take up training, and she kind of transforms more into a warrior princess and warrior queen. Going into this book, I did not realize what a large swath of time we are actually going to be following our main character. I assumed we'd kind of just follow her from her adolescence to her early adulthood, but that is not the case at all. We see a huge amount of KKE's life. We see her as a young child, we see her as a young bride, we see her kind of come into herself and her power, we see her as a young mother, an older mother, all of the emotional aspects of that. And throughout all of this, we also see KKE struggle to try to find not only a place for herself within society, but also fight to make space for all women in society as well. I do feel like the beginning was a bit slow, and I kind of had a harder time falling into KKE's headspace. But as the story began to pick up speed, and as we began to kind of follow her in different chapters of her life, I really became very connected to her as a main character. Structurally speaking, I liked the writing as well. It never really lost its mythology component to it, and one of my favorite aspects of mythology-based fantasy books is when we see kind of a humanized version of these great acts of heroism or these great acts of God intervention that will be kind of cemented within lore and history for all of time, and seeing those stories but played through a different point of view of KKE, I thought was really fascinating. She often also broke the fourth wall and sometimes spoke directly to us as the reader, the concept being she is penning her own story, her own point of view of what really happened from how she viewed the situation. I really felt like the strength of this book especially was in the middle of it. I really loved a lot of the conversations around motherhood and seeing her develop these different types of female relationships she was surrounded with. I do feel like the pacing slowed down a bit near the end, and sometimes I do feel like the dialogue was a bit too on the nose for what the author was trying to say, but ultimately I did really enjoy it. I felt like it was a really cool concept come to life, and I enjoyed the writing style, and I'll for sure be checking out more books by this author. Ultimately, I gave this book a 3.75 out of 5 stars, and it also makes me just want to read more books set in India, because honestly, so much of the stories that happened in this were fascinating, and I loved that so much. And the last book I completed this month has to be another new all-time favorite. I really do feel like I oscillated between love and that was pretty good and love and yeah, that was okay. The book I'm talking about is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. Honestly, this book is just everything I love in stories. It's so simple, like in theory, but so rich with emotion and life that I could not put this book down at all. I had a month full of quests and magical competitions and literal legends of godhood, but this story about two girls growing up and coming into womanhood was the book I read the fastest and was not able to put down because I was entranced by their life and by the story of these two girls. I loved it so much, and I also cannot wait to read the next two books in this trilogy. But My Brilliant Friend is the first book to the Neapolitan trilogy, and it opens on firstly childhood and then the adolescence of two young girls, Elena and Lila. The story is told from Elena's point of view, and the story is set in their small and poor neighborhood in the 1950s in Naples, Italy. This is a story of these two young girls' friendship, but also about their survival, about them coming into themselves, about them fighting for themselves, and also about the ebbs and flows of the relationship itself. Structurally speaking, I really enjoyed how this book was written. Elena Ferrante really throws you in, does not hold your hand. You're confronted with a neighborhood full of names, these connections and rivalries that stretch generations, and you kind of just have to slowly begin to figure it out. Again, the story is told from our main character, Elena, and in book one, we watch her from elementary school to high school, and what is very singular in her life is her relationship with another girl in the neighborhood named Lila. And what I think is so fascinating about this story, which is very much coming of age and centers friendship, is that the friendship between Elena and Lila is incredibly dynamic. dynamic. And Elena herself is kind of exploring all aspects of what being in a relationship with someone is, and that these two girls are drawn to each other. They find safe harbor with one another, but there's also jealousy and bitterness and a lot of frustration that plays out mostly as a result of the society and the town in which they're growing up in. Just the realness and the emotional intensity of all of these small moments of life, you just feel unbelievably present in everything that's going on. Also, I would say the town in which these girls grow up in and the time, which is post-World War II, is a time that feels rather tumultuous. There is obviously development, there's looking to the future, there's a lot of aspects of the past that are still around, and the neighborhood that they live in is poor and often errs on the side of violence, and the girls kind of have to navigate a lot of fraught situations the best they can, and given that they're young women in this time period, they have very limited power, but they're both incredibly smart, and the conversation of education and the paralleled experiences of these two friends where one is able to be educated formally where the other is not, and the sort of competition but camaraderie that comes within this is also explored, and that is fascinating. This book is honestly really intense in a way that is surprising. Every small chapter that you read, and the chapters themselves are very short, feels like everything is on the brink of disaster. There's moments of happiness and there's moments of joy, but everything also seemingly feels a little short-lived, or you're waiting for something to explode. And what I also think is so fascinating about this book is that this is a story of two girls and their friendship, but it's also a story of a neighborhood, of a community, of a nation, of a time period, and all of that also shines through their relationship and also how the community is treating the girls themselves. This book is gripping, it's beautiful, it's emotional and dynamic. It's just the conversations we see these two girls have, just how Elena Ferrante is able to put pen to paper and write a female connection was just something that was so beautiful and I loved so much, and I cannot wait to read more books by this author. And just even the name, like My Brilliant Friend, like that has so many different meanings when you read this book. Like even the title is fantastic, and you just don't even realize until you encounter it. 5 out of 5 stars, one of the best books I've ever read, basically is what I'm trying to say. And the last book I am just going to quickly mention as I'm still in the midst of it, and that is The Shadow Rising, Wheel of Time Book 4 by Robert Jordan. I have read / listened to about 150 pages of this book. I have much of it left, so I really am gonna keep my thoughts rather brief. I'm going into this book with very high expectations, which I keep saying. So far, I am liking the first 150 pages. I feel like each book I have read so far in the Wheel of Time has done a better job kicking things off quickly. I also have begun to see more cooperation and more like thoughtful strategy and planning between characters versus the first 3 books really feel like people being pulled by fate and chance, just like thrown from one location to another. This book seems like we're getting a little more development and autonomy between the characters making choices, which I like, but ultimately I'm just hoping for a bit of a change within book 4. I haven't encountered it quite yet, but I do love so many of the characters, so I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. Again, I have not read enough of this book to give you more thoughts and feelings than that, but like I want some new characters. Like I want to go to a new land, you know what I mean? Give it to me. I'm ready. Alrighty guys, those are all the books I read for the month of May. Let me know down below some books you've read recently, as I would love to know, and I will see you soon with another video soon. Goodbye.